Let's say you have a piece of matter, an apple, for an example, and I ask you to divide it in half. And I ask you to take that half and divide it in its own half. And I ask you to keep going and dividing it further and further and further. How far would you get? Is there a point in which you cannot go further? Or could you keep dividing until infinity? You see, this has been the question of the centuries, asked by many intellectuals, well, including in ancient Greek. Particularly two men have raised this question: Democritus, of course, and Aristotle. Different timelines. They both believed matter could be divided, but how far you could divide it is something they held in contrast. We're going to dive into it much more deeper. With Democritus, he believed that there was a limit. There was a point in which matter was no longer divisible. If you had an apple and you had to share it, there is a point in which you can't share anymore. You can't cut it any further. And that's called atomism. You see, the word atom means indivisible, or what in Greek used to be called atomos. But in a different time, Aristotle thought about matter differently. You see, Aristotle didn't believe there was a limit to how far you can divide matter. He believed that you could keep dividing until infinity, eventually running around a circle without a destination. And of course, Aristotle thought about his ideas later on after Democritus. And by then, Democritus' idea of atomism was already well accepted within society. It has solidified itself as the way in which we think about matter. For almost 1,000 years, atomism was an unchallenged idea. But in the 1800s, something else happened. Scientists started thinking differently about matter. In the year 1803, there was a chemist by the name of John Dalton. While he was doing some experiments in his lab, as he was weighing the compounds that he was experimenting with and comparing their ratios, the ratios of their mass, he discovered that there is a relative atomic mass, or rather, an estimated mass of an atom. And he published that under the atomic theory. And later on, there was another scientist in the year 1897 by the name of J.J. Thomson. J.J. Thomson, as he was doing an experiment with electrode or cathode rays, discovered something, that there is a particle, a negatively charged particle with a relatively small mass. He named this new particle the electron. Whoa, did we just discover that there is something smaller than an atom? What just happened? The discovery of an electron revolutionized physics. It changed the world forever. But as the scientific community was still in shock, there was another scientist in 1917 whose name was Ernest Rutherford, and he did an experiment with nitrogen gas and throwing alpha particles at this gas. And he realized that there was some deflection happening. Some hydrogen nuclei was being deflected from this gas. And he figured that that nuclei is positively charged. He wondered, is there a particle responsible for this? Well, in 1920, he named this particle the proton. Now we had just discovered as the scientific community that there was more to the atom than just the electron. There was another particle called the proton. Wow! But something else happened. To make matters worse, in 1932, a scientist by the name James Chadwick did a similar experiment, but he used beryllium gas. And as he was throwing some alpha particles at beryllium gas, he figured that the radiation that was coming out was actually neutrally charged. Whoa, what does this mean? As he pondered, he figured that there must be another particle inside an atom that is responsible for this positive charge. And he named it a neutron. Yes, another particle was discovered. Now we have 3 particles that we know of by 1932 that are inside an atom. Does that mean the atom is not fundamental after all? It's made up of other things? Well, later on we'll even discover that the neutron and the proton themselves are made up of other things. But not to confuse you further, why do we still call an atom if we now know that it's divisible? Since the word atom means indivisible, why do we still call the atom the atom? Well, the scientists had a conversation about this sometime in the 1900s, in the 1930s, and they figured that it's going to take them quite a lot of effort to try and change the name and get it out of scientific community. So they figured they will just leave it, we'll just figure it out on our own. But anyway, this is where the name proton atom comes in. You see, the name proton atom, it's a rename of the atom without necessarily throwing away the word atom. The word proton means formally in Greek. And of course, the word atom means indivisible. So putting them together, it actually means the atom is formally indivisible, or at least the name says formally indivisible. Well, I believe this is the best way for us to talk about an atom, a particle that was once indivisible, that eventually we discovered that it was divisible after all. Well, but this raises more questions than it answers. And we will ask these questions later, and we will answer them for you. Just stay tuned to the channel. Welcome to the Proton Atom channel.